Hello, Paso. Welcome to Philosophic Dialogues from La Frontera, where we share the fun of the big questions with you. My name is Dr. Kim Diaz, and I teach philosophy here at EPCC.
My name is Jules Simon, and I'm a philosopher at the University of Texas, El Paso.
And today we are so happy to have Dr. Flores be our guest. Clarinetist Yasmin Flores has performed the clarinet and given clarinet masterclasses around the U.S. for over 15 years. She received her Doctor of Musical Arts degree in Clarinet Performance and Pedagogy from the University of Iowa. In the past, she has performed with the Las Cruces Symphony Orchestra, the El Paso Symphony Orchestra, and she's a member of the El Paso Clarinet Quartet and the host of the EPCC TV show, The Arts at EPCC. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Yes, of course. I appreciate it. Yeah.
We would like to start by asking you, what, in your opinion, because, I mean, you've studied music for so many years, right? Mm-hmm. What is beauty, in your opinion?
Wow. And it's such a deep question, and something that I rarely on occasion talk about with my students, because I think our students are, and all of us, you know, we do our 9 to 5, right? We're all stuck in our little routine, in our little, in our track. And so we rarely, on the weekend maybe, if we have a chance, go to the Rose Garden, go to some of these museums in El Paso to enjoy some of the artwork, or a concert, right, with the El Paso Symphony Orchestra, etc. And so what are those moments, and what is considered beautiful? So first of all, much of it is in the eyes of the beholder, but I think there is also some universality to what is beautiful. And it's always something that is usually something that is extraordinary, something that we can't quite describe. That seems to be many times what we find is beautiful. Generally speaking, we can start what I think is beautiful. We'll talk about that. And so I love nature. I love flowers. I love birds. For me, colors is a really big deal in beauty and some of the things that I envision when I'm playing. For example, when I perform, I like to picture a movie sometimes in my head, or a scene, right? And so that helps me to convey what I'm trying to do with my instrument. Musicians, and especially instrumentalists, the instrument is a foreign object to you, right? And so we have to learn, we spend many years in school trying to learn how to manipulate this external object, right? And so once we learn how to manipulate this object, then we can really start to open our minds, and we're free to express ourselves with this. So, for example, one of my favorite composers, Johannes Brahms, right, wrote this beautiful trio for clarinet, cello, and piano. It's just absolutely stunning. And anytime I have the opportunity to play it, I'll take it. And there are moments where I feel like I'm floating, like literally almost like an out-of-body experience, because just the way those three instruments click and the music that he wrote, it's just extraordinary. It really is. And there's nothing in my life that's anything like that, right? I like to compare music a lot to food as well. I do that with my students, and I'll say, okay, now this chord is the filet mignon, this chord is ground beef, you know? So I kind of use like either different cuts of steak, or we talk about salads as well, or a green apple. I'll use a Granny Smith apple as an example of certain like bright, strident chords, right? And so kind of relating all of that, and especially in sometimes simpler terms for beginning musicians, so that they can kind of start to understand these things. But when you talk about beauty, I think beauty is just that connection to a higher being. That's essentially it. And whether you want to call that higher being God, if you want to call that, you know, the universe, whatever you want to call it, it is this just, and sadly it only lasts, it's so fleeting. those moments that you have when you can connect. But when it does happen, it's something that musicians get addicted to, artists get addicted to. Mm-hmm. And so we're always striving to get back to that place. That was a long answer.
I love it. I love it.
Good.
Well, let me ask already.
Uh-oh, here we go.
No. I was listening to your answer, mm-hmm. and two ideas struck me. One is the fleetingness of the experience of the phenomenon of beauty, right? Mm-hmm. And the other one is wanting to get back to it.
Yeah.
So do you think experiencing the briefness of a beautiful moment or a beautiful score, that experience, do you think it's, when I call it beautiful, is it because I want to tell you to share that with you, or I want to personally get back to that experience of beauty because it creates a sense of harmony in me, or because it makes me think differently or feel differently, and then changes my life?
So I think we as human beings, even those loners out there, right? Those folks, and especially after the pandemic, it seems like students don't talk to each other anymore. They're sitting right next to each other, and they don't even say hello sometimes. And so we are built to share experiences. We are just built to share. And a lot of that has happened post-pandemic has been recent. Like this is, I think students are barely starting to go back to pre-pandemic. You know, the attitudes, everybody's starting to finally come out of their shell. But before, I remember 2020, 2021 was when we got back in music, and it was like, and everybody had to sit 6 feet apart, mm-hmm, right? That was horrible. Mm-hmm. And so, but we are built to share, and we are built to create relationships and bond on things and have commonalities. And so I think, to answer your question, I think that we want to share every aspect of life, right? With our close friends, with our family, with our students, with whoever's around, like, guess what happened today? You know, this, that, and the other. Or if you see, like, one day, as a matter of fact, that garden, I don't know if to call it a garden, but it's the patio that's at Valle Verde in the A building. So they took out all the trees at some point, and then they started planting a few things. And I was so excited to see that they were starting to plant things, because I thought, oh, good. I was staring at dirt for a while there. And just, the concrete. And so that's something I think when we enjoy something, we want to share it. We really do. We don't just want it for ourselves, and especially something as extraordinary as nature or the divine, right? A divine entity, that a power that you feel. And usually when it first strikes you, and I do remember the first time. Actually, you know what? I do remember the first time I felt it. Mm. It was Christmas of 1996, and I was standing right in front of the twinkling Christmas tree. I'll tell you this funny story. Somebody might be related to Linda out there. I had a teacher named Linda Orantia. And Linda was real busy. She was one of the band directors at Bachelor at the time in the 90s. And so she was canceling a few of my lessons. And so I was in a panic by October. I was like, called Linda, said, Miss Orantia, I need my solo and ensembles coming up in February. I need to like practice it. I need to know. So finally, my mother goes and picks up the copy, right? Because this is pre-internet, pre-email, right? Mm-hmm. So she picks up the physical copy and she brings it home. And I take out my little wire stand and I put Paul Jean-Jean's Arabesques, okay, for clarinet and piano. Real simple little piece. But the chord at the beginning, la da 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 da, I mean, it just slaps you with heaven from that very first, like, oh, that's so stunning. And it was in that moment that I was like, I've never, like, it took my breath away, right? And I was like, oh, what? Oh, I need to practice more. And so it does. For musicians, it becomes almost like a drug, like, okay, I gotta do it again. And so that was my first experience. And so then at that point, when I got back to school the next day or next week, I wanted to play it for everybody. I wanted to show them, like, let me play you my solo though. My solo is really cool. And so, and they were very supportive, you know, all my friends in high school. And so they heard me and they were like, oh yeah, that is, you know, really cool piece. But I don't know that it necessarily struck them. And that goes back to our perception. Everybody has a different perception of certain things, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, but even though we have a different perception, I hope, I trust it is the case for me that even though it hasn't been with the clarinet or with this one piece, I've had that feeling playing the djembe with a drum circle.
Right.
I've had that feeling at dead shows when I used to follow the dead, you know?
Okay.
Where practicing yoga, practicing martial arts, where dancing, right? Where it is this, but for me, I can tell you specifically playing the djembe because you're creating music together. Well, I mean, it's not a solo, right? So you're together in community. And I've had these great insights where I could only have had those insights because I was playing with a group of people. And I needed everybody else to be playing their part in order for me to play my part.
Right.
And together, even though we're individuals, we're creating this awesome music.
Yes.
And this drug feeling like of looking up and like, wow, this is awesome.
Yeah.
You know?
Right. And that when you do
connection.
that, when you do exactly what you just described, that's actually when you jump back out of that connection. Because all of a sudden you're back down on the ground and you're like, oh, I'm surrounded by people. Oh, okay, and we're playing. Okay, and then you have to kind of work to get back into the groove, right? With everybody and reestablish, like I said, that connectivity that you were talking about just a moment ago. Yes, it takes, and that's actually what pulls us away. It's like almost like a fear, because when we're connected for too long, right, to this divine idea or this divine thing, it's like all of a sudden we start going, uh-oh, wait, what's going on? Let me jump back into my body. Figure out, where am I? Let me make sure I'm still okay. Oh, we're good. Okay, all right. It's, you know, and it's sadly, fear is what brings us back. And a questioning of, am I still doing it okay? Am I still playing? I'm still playing? Yeah, really weird.
My question was a little different.
Oh, okay.
So,
sorry about that.
Both of you, I think, drifted into question number 2.
Oh, I see.
What is aesthetics? What's my sensual engagement in the world? I'm engaged, I'm with other people.
Sure.
I'm playing an instrument, we hear sounds going on. I mean, that's all our kind of physical, emotional, aesthetic experience, right?
Right.
But I think beauty is something a little bit different than all that. And we can describe aesthetic experiences as beautiful. But it's so I teach aesthetics, and I teach what's called Kantian aesthetics. And one of the things he says about the experience of beauty, which I tend to agree with, is that beauty is an act of judgment. So I judge something to be beautiful.
Right, sure.
So I say to you, Yasmin, don't you think that was beautiful?
Right.
Can you tell me yes? Do you agree with me? Wasn't that beautiful? Right. And conversely, you can say, oh man, that was so ugly.
Right, exactly.
Right?
Sure.
You know, so in terms of that bonding that you both were referring to, and what you know, I guess that was the agreement that I was kind of fishing for, was
Sure.
it's agreeing about the judgment that piece or that experience of that painting or whatever
Right.
was beautiful and created something in me, and was it creating it in you too?
Right. And so that kind of goes back to that universality that I said. Some things, you know, I think back to some of the old cafes in Iowa when I was up there. Cafes were all the rage at the time, and the matcha green tea was like in its, you know, in its height, right? And so now everybody's like, oh yeah, green tea, big deal. But when it first came out in like the United States, anyway, my point is, the walls had, sometimes an artist would paint these little portraits, right? These little paintings. And sometimes it looks like something my dog could have painted, right? And it's like, and they wanted to charge like $600 for the set. And I'm like, for what? I'll go take a pen and I'll just do that and I'll do this. But I think that, so that's kind of along the lines, like someone thinks this is outstanding, right? Someone is going to appreciate this. And I have to respect that. And so I think it goes back to the saying of beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. It really depends. There are going to be people that agree with that person. There are going to be people that disagree with that person, right? But for sure, there are certain things that have more of a following, a stronger following than other things. And I feel like I'm still not answering your question.
Well, that's because I think the judgment of beauty is something, at least, you know, from that the perspective I was referring to, is something that unites us, as opposed to the beauty is in the eye of the beholder, which is what we say.
Right.
We say that all the time.
Sure.
But actually, the judgment of something beautiful is something that we make when we want other people to agree with our perspective. So I say it because I want you to share that with me. I want you to share that same feeling in some way. Or I want to know if you share it.
Sure.
You know, was that beautiful or was that ugly? You know, you know, is this something that we can? Is this something we want to go back to and do again? You know, it was that beautiful. It was that remarkable that we want to keep going back to it, right?
Yes.
And then going back together. You know, and so that we can share this experience of beauty together.
Right. Absolutely.
I guess that's what I was getting at, and I'm not sure. Because I think the experience of blank in the eye of the beholder has a role in all kind of art experiences.
Sure, of course.
Because it's, you know, this kind of aesthetic, emotional experience that we have. And so in that way, it's very individualizing.
Yeah.
But when I make a judgment of something of that, then it becomes public. Then it becomes something that you and I have to agree on, or I want you to agree on it.
Sure.
Because I want you to, you know, share the same world with me or something like that.
A couple of things. One is also earlier when you were talking about music, but then you compare it to a filet mignon or the ground beef, right? Or salads. There's actually a term, which of course I can't remember right now, but when two or more senses blend, right? So
Synesthetics.
Yes, there you go.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
You know, so can you give us an example, right? Like, my shirt smells orangey. Obviously it doesn't, but or you describe something visual with a sound or with a smell.
Sure.
Anyway. It's real interesting.
And so I remember watching an interview with the guy that sang, I think his name is Pharrell, right? And he's a pop artist, right? And he has that. He has the synesthesia, and he was, I don't remember if he was talking to Oprah or who it was, but it was this pretty long interview, and he was talking about that, how he sensed colors with sound, right? And so he could see the sound, right? And so I do not have that for sure. I can already tell you. But for me, it's I think a lot of it is just really trying to connect, especially music appreciation students, for example, students that are non-music majors that are taking our appreciation courses. And so sometimes when we're talking about certain subjects, they start to kind of lose a little bit of interest because either it's getting too technical or it might be some style of music that they're not a big fan of, right? And so I start comparing things. I start using things that they're used to. It's like, okay, well, this to me, especially when I talk about like Bach cantatas, for example. Bach cantatas to me are like a Granny Smith apple, or some of his like the Brandenburg concertos, right? Very, very bright sounding. You have like these piccolo trumpets. You have the harpsichord, the flutes. Everything's kind of a lighter, higher instruments there, and so it's like, okay, what is light? What is bright? Right? I could use colors, and sometimes I do, but I think most people connect with food. And so food has always been something for me. I like to cook on the side, I'm certainly not, master chef or anything like that, but I do like to cook, and I like to try different things. And so it's that connection. It's that, like, how would I describe this? I'll use cheesecake, chocolate, caramel, talked about cajeta the other day, just whatever that they can connect to and go, oh, okay, all right, this makes a little more sense now. Yeah.
This is you talking like a pedagogue.
Oh, right, yes. Right, yeah. Yeah, exactly.
You got your doctorate in clarinet and pedagogy.
Yes, that is correct.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. How do you get the student to latch on? How do you latch the student onto the subject matter?
Exactly.
I also want to ask you, because you clearly care about the arts, you clearly care about beauty. You have, right, a doctorate degree, and you teach, but not only that, you also have a show about the arts.
Yes.
Why do you think it's important for us humans to think about beauty?
So before the show, we were talking a little bit about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And at the pinnacle, now some people have added a new layer. It's above self-actualization. They've added like
The crown chakra of the
right, yes, exactly,
right?
yes. But self-actualization was the basically the top of the pyramid for years and years, and essentially, music is important because any of the fine arts, because it is us reaching our own very best as a human being. If you really stop and think about this, the evolution of humanity, and we just started Hildegard von Bingen today in music appreciation, and so the book has a lot of artwork, and I point out to the students, like, look, this is how primitive the human beings were. They were not thinking in 3 dimensions. They were everything was still very 2-dimensional. It looks like the saints are layered, like not even layered, but they're just stacked, their heads are stacked on top of each other, because they didn't understand how to draw depth, right? And so that primitive mentality is what's also creating this music. Now, to me, and I can't speak very much for art, but for me in music, I think for us, it's a little bit harder to distinguish what's older music, especially because you have so many imitations nowadays. Like, I talked to them about Enya today, which nobody knew who Enya was. But Enya was a group that was real popular. They did the soundtrack to The Lord of the Rings, about 25 years ago or so. And so it's like those background voices that you hear, kind of like choir type sound. Well, it's very similar to early Catholic church music. And so what's the difference there, right? It's reminiscent of that, especially, to the non-musician. So I think with music, it's a little tougher to decipher what era are we listening to. Is this an imitation of a previous era, etc. And with art, I think it's much clearer for our eyes to decipher and go, oh, okay, that was not drawn or painted within the past 200 years. This is a much older, right? And so the evolution of humanity And now you're going to have to remind me of the question again. I'm
Why
sorry.
is it important for us to think about beauty? And
yes.
then you talked about Maslow's hierarchy.
Yes, and so that's it. It's that the fine arts are that's what we reach for. So now I'm not going to remember the quote. Oh my goodness! And I'm sorry that my brain
I'm
is
the same. I'm thankful Jules knows what he's talking about over here, because I'm like,
England, World War II.
was it Churchill?
Yes, Winston Churchill had a famous quote and it was along the lines of, the whole reason why we're fighting for this is for the arts. Why do we go through all of this trouble? And it's to be free. I asked the class, if I gave you a check, if I wrote you a check for $1 billion, what would you do? Right? And they're
You
like,
asked me that the other day.
oh, really? What would you do? And of course,
What would you spend it on?
Yes, what would you spend it on? What would you do with yourself? And they go, first thing, I'd drop school and I would get a Ferrari, a Lamborghini, I'd get a yacht, I'd get a house, I'd pay for this and I'd pay for that. Yeah, that's great. And you might spend about, $100 million on that. And then what? What are you going to do with yourself, right? Why do you think a lot of these lottery winners, they wind up going back to work? They don't know what to, how do you...
Is this you challenging the pinnacle of Maslow's hierarchy by saying that, well, maybe self-actualization is not the pinnacle?
Oh,
right?
that's true.
Because that's beyond, I spent $100 million on myself, right? But what are you going to do after you get self-actualized?
Right.
I got all this money. Maybe I'm going to start cultivating the arts and beauty and getting people to think on the same page or something like that.
That's it. And that's what I'm trying to get them.
And you were talking about transcending,
That's it.
Transcending
that's the new peak. That's what they call it, transcending. And there's this transcendental whole thing, but a lot of folks are like, they stick to the original pyramid, but that's it. And that's what I'm trying to get them to realize, is that there's more to things than just money, right? And everyone, I think, when you look at the pyramid and some of the lower levels, it's that we're so stuck in survival, right? In just survival mode, that it's like people can't think beyond that, unfortunately. They're not in a place. And I want to desperately get them to that place, to think beyond the $1 billion, right? Because making money, if you hustle, you'll make it. You'll do it. You'll get the house. You'll pay off the car.
Yeah, you can play your instrument like it's a tool,
right?
Just to make money at the nightclub. And
sure, exactly.
Pay my rent.
Exactly.
And it's also, and the fear.
Yeah.
The fear of survival, So if the approach, the emotion that is the cloud of, right, for lack of words here, but it is my very approach to what I do is either instrumental. I'm playing my instrument not necessarily to express myself, but as a tool, or it's out of fear that I'm playing, or I'm hustling, or I'm working to survive.
Right.
And so it's not the most aesthetic, and what keeps us from that connection, from transcending.
Right. And sadly, a lot of it has to do with, in the world we live in today, has to do with getting money to get yourself established, to find a comfortable place for yourself as a person. But I like to think backwards. I always, and I've asked myself this, I go, okay, what is the dream, right? What if I had $1 billion? What would I be doing right now? And the thing I've had to learn is you can't just hand people money. You have to teach them, right? You have to teach them, like, okay, I can help you out a little bit halfway, but you got to learn how to, fend for yourself and, really create your own life, etc., right? But I think a utopia, and we all can picture this, what would a perfect world be like? And I just picture a garden. I picture just sitting around this fountain, right? This beautiful fountain with clean water, and I can eat anything. It doesn't have poison, it doesn't have pesticides, right? All these beautiful things, listening to harps play, and, you know, perhaps that's my heaven, right? You know, in my mind. But that's what I wish everyone could see and everyone could strive for. And so, you know, you and I have talked about our campuses, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the questions I get asked a lot from my colleagues is like, why does that bother you? Why does that? I get annoyed if, like, when the posters are
Off.
Yeah. Or they didn't staple them in each of the corners, and they're folding, or all these little silly mundane things, right? And there I go with my stapler, and I'm trying to fix things, or I'm trying to tape things, or I'm trying to clean, you know, whatever it may be, wipe things down, etc. And they just think I'm totally neurotic sometimes, like, whoa, who cares? I'm like, I do, because I want this place to be stunning.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I want our students to experience something that looks like a beautiful bank, right? And not, you know, like a bus station, you know, with just like random catalogs just thrown on a table, etc., you know, whatever it is. And so sometimes I'll go around and I'll start stacking things, and it's just taking a pride in your world. And
as a philosopher, I really appreciate you sharing with us that the importance of beauty is the quality of your life.
Mm-hmm.
If you know, thinking backwards about starting with the beautiful instead of the survival.
Right.
And the other thing about that is, if we don't start with the beautiful and we start with the survival, which is where most of us begin, really,
right,
you know, at the bottom of the hierarchy, of Maslow's hierarchy. The problem with that, I think, is that sometimes we get stuck in that.
Right.
And so even if we actually have enough money, we have shelter, we have food, we're okay, but we're so stuck psychologically at that level that we stay stuck in it, and we can't transcend it onto the next,
right,
to connect, to appreciate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I agree with that.
Well, we'll get to the appreciation
Okay.
part in a little bit, but you know,
okay.
the way you were talking, it made me think about this, and also you, Yasmin, by talking about the campus and how you like things just right. And a couple of thoughts came up in my mind. One was, you know, as a musician, and you're involved in the college, and you're involved in campus improvement and things like that, right? But as a musician, you've individually took on the practice and the challenge of learning how to order your expressions, the very breath of your body, right? To modulate it in such a way that this beautiful sounds come out of this instrument, right? And you have to learn pretty rigorously in a disciplined way, you know, when to pause, how much breath to pull in and how much to expel and all that. And all those little things that take all that attention. And look, can't you just staple up the corners just correctly? You know, I've gotten this far, you know, by expending all this kind of attention and energy and a good chunk of your life, right? A good part of my life.
Yeah.
Let's just straighten things up. It'll be just orderly, much less beautiful, you know. And so there's that one aspect I was thinking about, you know, how do you approach your like institutional activities musically? You know, that kind of question. There kind of musical approach that you engage in because you're such a practiced musician, it's got to be in your fibers. The fibers of your body and your blood.
Yeah.
And then the other question I thought of, besides survival instincts and instrumentalism, This famous thinker once said that, the first noble truth in life is suffering. You know, so the arts or music in some way, why do we? In what way does art or music, perhaps principally music, address that truth, the truth of suffering, as opposed to, say, survival, instrumental thinking?
Do you forget the name of the thinker? Should I just say the name just for reference? Did you brain fart?
No, I didn't brain fart.
Okay.
Good.
That's the first noble truth. The Buddha.
In Buddhism, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so those are the two questions. One was, what's this relationship of art and music, perhaps because you're a musician, but you're a teacher of art,
Right.
of art appreciation, right? To suffering.
Yes.
And the other one was, maybe related, maybe not, how do you approach your daily activities musically? Do you approach them with a kind of a musical tenor or an attunement or something, or an ideal?
Right. I think so. I can answer that question first. I think that's the easier one for me to answer. And so I will say that as a musician, we're perfectionists.
Right.
I mean, we're just natural perfectionists, especially as instrumentalists, right? And so our mind is set to make everything stunning. Like everything's got to be flawless. Now, there are people that are far worse. I don't even consider myself OCD, okay? I consider myself just, I feel like my standards aren't that high, but sometimes, maybe they are, I don't know. And so the same approach, picture a practice room at West Texas A&M in my early 20s, where it was like, I'm gonna work on this, and I would work on music for hours and clean up these passages, these technical, and so you have to take it really slow and go, what is my hand doing, right? And so I have analyzed, I sit at night literally wondering why either others don't partake in my stapling, right? Okay, and because I want to get down into the psychology of it, and I think a lot of my colleagues are in a survival mode. It's that their job, they do their job very well, and I think of different folks from different areas, different disciplines, who sometimes I'll run into them and they're there grading. They're grading papers in the middle of the day, which I never do. I always grade papers on the weekend or at night at home. And because my daytime, and I started here pretty quickly as a coordinator, about a year in at EPCC, my second year I was a coordinator. And so I just got to know that the daily minutia, what I call the daily minutia, because you can't get started on a project because I get the
Right.
Yeah. So it's like, never mind, and let me get absorbed into this story. Let me get absorbed into this, whoever the student is or whatever the faculty, right? And so I wind up working Sunday through Saturday, relatively 9 a.m. to 10 or 11 p.m., right, every day, to try to cover all the bases. And so I'm trying to think of your question. So the thing that I distinctly remember is what an oboist does. Oboists are specifically trained, not like clarinet players, not like everybody else, but they have to exhale their breath.
Right.
Because there's so much resistance in the reed that they're taught at some point after, find a breath where you're going to go and then tank up again so that you can, start to play the next line. No other instrument has to necessarily do that as much as the oboe, because no other instrument has so much restriction, right? And so so when I took oboe lessons in undergrad, I learned that. I was like, oh wait, I'm gonna pause and you want me to exhale? Like what? Because I've always been taught to inhale. Every breath where you go, you know, da 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 da, and you're running out of air, da 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 da, da 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 da. But it's true. My oboe teacher, Dr. Krause at WT, was the one that said, you have stale air. And all you're doing is you're stacking your new air on stale air.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah. And so now your question is, when do you pause? When do you take a moment to exhale and go, I'm going to save this for tomorrow? And that is, you have struck one of my faults as a human being, is that it gets on my nerves that it's already 11 p.m. and I have to go to sleep because I'm not done. I'm never done. I'm never done.
Yeah.
And so it's one of the things that irks me, and it's going to irk me tonight when I get home, and I'm going to be like, but I still need to grade, and then I still need to, and I have to email the. My mind is always just going. Now your other question.
Well, the other question could be related because you could be the suffering artist.
Oh, right. Exactly. I am. Right.
Yeah, you already described yourself as suffering, Yasmin.
Exactly. I suppose so. Yeah, the suffering artist. It's true, and I think my answer was going to be to that when you get a new piece of music, how desperately you want to play it, and sound like the recording and sound like the YouTube video, but it's gonna take months, and I'm a very impatient person, and I want to sound good now, right?
Yeah.
But one of the hardest things to learn, Dr. Mead at the University of Iowa taught me. She said, "Why are you always practicing everything fast? We're always practicing, and then that's where you get all your little bad habits, right?" And she turned down the metronome and go, no. And she taught me, and I teach this to my students, the relaxation of the fingers is so important because you can develop carpal tunnel if you don't hold a clarinet right, if you don't play correctly. And so it's all about, and also you start to build a lot of arthritis, right? If you're a clencher, you get a lot of clarinetists that love to squeeze the music out of the clarinet. And so you learn.
Choke that clarinet.
I know,
right?
All right,
choke that thing.
Exactly.
It's not behaving like I want it to behave.
Exactly.
You stupid thing.
So it's, the frustration, you couldn't begin to know. So you learn a technique, and I describe it as the sandbags in the back of a theater. So when they open the curtains, right? There's always these weights, right? So I tell my students, okay, picture weights on each of your fingers. And your job is to lift. Your job is not to drop. Do you let the fingers drop? Your job is to lift, not to press, right? So teaching them that, right? And she taught me that. And she said, just drop each finger slowly. Slowly, slowly, slowly. And doing it slow for months cleans it up. It cleans up the music beautifully. And so suddenly, and you also learn it a lot better to do it slowly, right? And so it's one of the hardest lessons to teach anyone that's always going 200 miles an hour. And my mind is always going 200 miles an hour. And so I hate to take that time. But I know deep down inside that I should, and I don't. And so, sadly, So
yeah, there's other questions, that now that we're getting into this deeper into the dialogue, right? The reason why I said that was a wonderful lesson is because your teacher is, you were taught, and what you teach your students, right? Is you're teaching them to know their bodies too.
Oh, absolutely.
And how expressive our bodies are, and in your case, I guess the question is, do you consider your body musical, in that kind of way.
Yeah, absolutely. You
You
know,
have your breath, you have your fingers.
yes.
You have to have your arms in the right place, right?
Right.
You have to even be sitting upright. I
Yeah.
watched you playing with the clarinet, cello, and the piano.
Oh, yeah.
On that
yes.
particular, I forget the woman's name, Vasquez maybe?
Dr. Vasquez. Yeah, Dr.
Yeah.
Alina Vasquez.
Yeah, I
yes.
watched that episode as well. That was beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And one of the secrets that I learned, so funny, WT is a music education school. It was a music education school for years. I think it's still considered heavily music ed. And so they did a stunning job of breaking everything down to us so that we as band directors, as future band directors, choir directors, whatever, can break things down to younger kids as well. When I went from WT to Florida State, it was a kind of a rude awakening because Florida State was more like a performance school. It was performance and music ed, but you had a lot of performance majors there. And so now the expectation was that they expected you to everything had to be innate. And so hokey pokey. I'll tell you the story.
It had to be what?
Innate.
Okay.
Like just within you, like you just magically make these things. I don't know how you're gonna play the solo, but I just need you to. Okay, right? And I'll give you the date, and that's when you show up, and you're gonna sound stunning. Okay. Oh, okay. They're not gonna break anything down to you. So hokey pokey. Here's my story. WT, Gary Garner, wonderful band director, taught us a foot tap. You can picture the symphonic band in the 90s. Everybody was tapping their foot. We're looking like the Texas two-step over there. We're just all tapping our feet, right? And I get to FSU, and that's my habit. And I'm going, tapping my foot.
And they look at you like you are
doing the Texas two-step, right? And they were like, what you doing? I was like, oh, well, I'm keeping the beat. The beat isn't here. Well, you don't need that. And yet the reverse psychology was you have to externalize the beat to internalize the beat. They were using it as not a crutch, but like a previous step, right? And so it was like, oh, okay. So what I did in the practice room the next day was I taped my feet down to the ground.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah. So because I knew I was going to do this. I rolled up some tape, put it on the bottom, and I'm not going to
That's a funny story.
It is, yes. Yeah. A lot of funny experiences.
I want to ask you about appreciation.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. This is
What does it
big
mean to
area.
appreciate something?
That's a big question, yeah. And we, of course, we all teach our appreciation courses, but it's you don't have to love something to appreciate it, right? It's really, to me, appreciating something is knowing its value, right? Knowing its value in a person's life, in society. It may not be of value to that person, and I can attest to that because I have plenty of students in appreciation that do not like Haydn, right? Franz Joseph Haydn. They don't particularly like Josquin de Prez. But when they get to the flashy stuff, they love the flashy, right? Flashy is very easy for us to hear, very easy for us to love. But they have an appreciation for it. They know that somebody does love Haydn. Somebody does, particularly like Palestrina, right? When they're listening to these things. And they realize how it builds. Like we went from here, from Hildegard to Josquin to Palestrina to Bach to, and so they understand like this is an important step. I think, and so that's my best description of what appreciation is. It's knowing the value of something.
I like it because, like you said, we could be going through in life, right? We could be going through a difficult time that we would prefer not to be in, but you can still find value in it.
Right. Bingo.
What do you think about appreciation and enjoyment? I mean, like, I appreciate the symphony.
Yeah.
So I go and listen to the symphony being played.
Right.
So is that a little bit different? Because the way you are describing it, it's more like I understand and respect.
Yes,
right? That
correct.
kind of appreciation.
Right. Yes. And there's enjoyment, yes, like, and when those two go hand in hand, appreciation and enjoyment, then there's something within you that partakes in that event, that you might be tapping your foot, right? Like I was.
That's probably what caused me to think of that.
Right. Tapping your foot along to the music, but or you know, tapping your hands. Sometimes you'll see people, but there's usually some element of you. I have found, and I could be wrong, you can correct me, but I have found that people that truly enjoy what they're listening to, there's some part of them that wants to be on the stage with us. That either there's a regret that they weren't in band, or they weren't in orchestra, or they weren't in choir, right? And they just look at it with like this admiration and this not even envy, because envy kind of has a negative connotation, but it's this, like, you know, and you can see them like that they're just so absorbed in what we're doing. And I always enjoy playing for that kind of an audience. It's just so thrilling.
longing.
Yeah, yes. Whereas the ones that don't care, right, the ones that are required to be at the concert for concert reports, that's kind of the thing, is that, yes, appreciation can go hand in hand with enjoyment, absolutely.
I'm not sure our audience, maybe I'm being preachy, but you know, our audience caught that distinction, because on the one hand, what you've been talking about, and this is under the category of appreciation, right? Trying to understand that concept or that phenomenon, right? On the one hand, there is this respect and understanding of the phenomenon of art.
Sure.
Right?
Right.
You know, appreciate a good painting, or,
Yes.
or a good meal, right? The
Right.
artistic nature of the presentation.
Yes.
Or the
Right.
nutritional value.
Or the taste of it, right?
Yeah.
So there's that, and what you've been talking about wanting to be on the stage, right? That's like that appreciation of I want to be embraced by the experience.
Yes.
That's that aesthetic experience of it. My body, my senses want to be carried away in some way. But then earlier in our dialogue, you mentioned about Maslow and about pinnacles and being above and beyond. You know, and so some ways, this just you know popped into my head. Does art do this, or does music do this? Does it, on the one hand, take us into an experience, the musical, the sonata, the cantina, the song, you know, just embraces me somehow. I'm engaged, one with the music or the artwork or something.
Sure.
But on the other hand, does it do something like take me out of my body or relieve me of my suffering or something like that?
I think so.
I'm not sure how it could do both, but maybe it's both somehow.
Yeah, I think that the fine arts are a vehicle to that experience. It's a vehicle. It's, you know, whether it's John Philip Sousa, right, or it's Rachmaninoff, you know, whatever it may be. It's that is the vehicle that's taking you to that higher place where you forget what's going on around you.
Right.
And it's like a tunnel vision, right? Where you suddenly, like, you forget that your husband's next to you, forget your kids are over here fighting, you know, whatever it may be. And you're just like really focused on that thing that you are falling in love with, right? And that thing that you find stunning and beautiful, right? I think, and different types of art are that vehicle that takes you to that place. Yeah. And I know you're like way beyond anything I can quite comprehend.
Not true, Yasmin. You're the musician here. I'm just the philosopher who's making these observations. I did one time in my life, and I want to do it again, but I did play guitar for a while.
Oh, how fun.
Yeah, so I know about the playing just the right note at just the right.
Yes.
The strings have to be just right. And
Exactly.
You have to have the right pressure.
Absolutely. Right.
And
Absolutely.
that one note just has to ring clearly and true.
Yes.
In our case, clearly and distinctly.
Clearly and distinctly. Oh, yeah, that's a reference to a philosopher.
Anyway, we have so many more questions, and in fact, you've dealt with them, you know, and even though we didn't ask the question, you spoke to quality and, of course, peace and happiness and healing. So, do you have any last minute questions for us that we can fit in the last minute?
Oh my goodness. Well, I think I might have to have you guys on the show.
Okay.
And we may have to, may have to pick your brains a little bit and talk a little bit more about music and the arts and everything. But I just want to say,
I mean, we're liberal arts.
yeah.
So it's still arts.
And I work with poetry. I wrote a book called Art and Responsibility.
Oh,
So what's the relationship of art to ethics?
yeah. How cool.
Which we didn't even get into at all.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
There's a lot to talk about.
There is. There absolutely is. I appreciate both of you having me on the show today. Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us. It's been
Absolutely.
invigorating and a lively
And
discussion.
fun.
Yes,
And fun,
absolutely.
right. A lot of laughter.
Yes, absolutely. Well, if you ever want to chat about clarinet or clarinet music, you know where to find me, right? And just lovely to be here.
Thank you.
And yeah, I will send out an invite to you all. And
Oh, thank you.
yes, absolutely.
I want to thank Dr. Flores, our crew, Dr. Simon, and our viewers. This has been Philosophic Dialogues from La Frontera. Please join us next time.